Hello and welcome to Upside, where we dig into the real news that lives behind the headlines affecting European venture. Today, another full house. We have Mads, Lomax, Andrew, and myself, and we're talking about bending spoons. They've got a glorious roll-up strategy. We are going into a bit of the B word. There have been a number of stories this week about Brexit. We're turning the European innovation tanker. We've got OpenAI's Code Red looking behind the scenes there. Amazon is getting into chips. Meta's antitrust case and more AI bubble risk warnings. Are they meaningful or not? To start with, boys and girls, bending spoons. Now, this is one of my favorite ever strategies in the world. So just for context, Bending Spoons, Milan-based software company that behaves like a software holding company doing private equity style roll-ups. They are buying recognizable brands at a reset valuation. So those that are troubled or underperforming brands. So they've bought Evernote, Hopin. Do you remember Hopin? Great Cove, Meetup. I think they're in negotiations still with AOL. And Eventbrite, I'm pretty sure, closed this month at 500 million in cash. Now, I've always loved this. We've talked about bending spoons before, but Lomax, give us some other notes. Give us your take on the bending spoon strategy.
Well, I think, they're turning themselves into a sort of Berkshire Hathaway roll-up strategy of unloved legacy digital products, as you said. So they've acquired Eventbrite, Vimeo, Bright Cove, bunch of other companies.
All MarTech, right? All AdTech, MarTech, ComTech.
They're broadly in the same category, which I think makes sense if they are looking to rationalize, consolidate, and apply, some product and technical discipline. I think it's very, very highly valued now. It's 11 billion in valuation. They've clearly funded this with a lot of debt. They've actually raised relatively little equity, 400 to 500 million of equity, up to 3 billion in debt. And actually being European, where interest rates are lower, they're probably benefiting from, slightly lower interest rates. And they're probably a little bit exposed there should that go up. I think it's a great strategy. It reminds me slightly of listening to Bill Gurley earlier in the year when he was on Invest Like the Best, talking about the number of sort of zombified unicorns that we had out of the 2021 investment ZERP era. Admittedly, not a lot of these acquired companies are coming from that era. They're actually coming from that era. But it's a similar kind of philosophy, which is going around and acquiring at very attractive valuations, some unloved assets, and polishing them up and consolidating them. The risk with what they're doing is, I think always, as with any roll-up strategy, it makes a lot of sense on a Excel spreadsheet, very hard to implement in practice. There's going to be a lot of tech debt in these companies. And as always, when you roll up the sleeves and get under the surface, there could well be a lot more work than they think. But again, if that's all figured out on the entry, then that's sort of part of the risk they take and it's factored into the price. But I love the fact that this kind of buccaneering mindset is being executed by Europeans and our friends in Italy. So good for them. I think it's a great market opportunity for them. And I look forward to seeing which way it goes.
Mads, what would you add?
It's a super interesting strategy. It just combines some untraditional elements, kind of stuff you wouldn't have expected, right? So we've talked about this being a PE play, but it's not really a PE play because they're not buying to turn around and then ship off. It is, as Lomax said, it's buy and hold. And what they're doing effectively is it's a US-Europe arbitrage. They've said, what is the least likely place to build a high growth, kind of high value tech company in Europe? Well, Italy is probably right up there. So why don't we go to Italy? Basically what they do is they acquire all these US companies. They fire all the people in the US that are expensive. They hire the best of the best, the top Italian tech graduates, right? And they pay them relatively high salaries so they can get the best of the best in Italy. They put in place this kind of what they call kind of this Anglo-Saxon get shit done culture in a country where nobody expected that. We've all have this notion of Italy that's just, kind of nice espressos and, a beautiful fashion and all that stuff. But it's absolutely about getting stuff done. Hyper efficiency. So trim out the fat, lower the cost base, and you can just run all these companies as cash cows. It's got an extremely high employee satisfaction rating. I think it's 4.7 on Glassdoor. Coming up with this strategy, who would have thought? But they did, and they figured it out, and I just think it's great.
I genuinely thought after ZERP we'd see more of this, but we haven't. And I'm always keen. What have they done with Hopin? What did they do with Evernote? I mean, I get like AOL, if they end up doing the deal, obviously a big brand, there's maybe some value there, but I'm really intrigued as to how they turn these brands around and how they use these smart people. I'm really intrigued by where the value is. Andrew, have you got any thoughts on this before we move on?
Well, I mean, bending spoons has been around for about 100 years, isn't it? So you can, if you believe Uri Geller, then it's done with the mind, and magicians used to do it with sleight of hand. So, are they really revolutionizing dying tech companies, or are they just hoping that, the public markets are too stupid to see, billions of dollars sort of hiding in plain sight? I don't know.
In running this strategy for like the last maybe 4 years, they were going for a good decade just as a MarTech outfit. So they've only, from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, they've only actually been running this kind of roll-up piece for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. It's not been that long.
Yeah, look, most products are successful because of successful distribution. So if these guys know how to do that better than before they acquired the company, then they'll do well.
Yeah. And they've got a couple of their own products, obviously. They've been running their own stuff for a number of years. We are going to look at the B word. So lots of news articles this week around B for Brexit. Lammy wants to rejoin the customs union. Starmer is now tipped as a Brexit savior, whatever that means. And looking at the US-based National Bureau of Economic Research, they concluded that Brexit has reduced UK GDP by between 6 and 8%. Investment is worse off from between 12 and 18%. Employment 3 to 4%, and productivity also 3 to 4%. So this is a massive own goal, as we know. Are the stories this week meaningful is question number 1. And question number 2 is, if we can do something to join the customs union or some other reconnective tissue with Europe, how will that affect our ecosystem? Obviously, we know the basics, but is there anything else that we can dig into? Mads, can you kick this one off?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on the Starmer being a Brexit savior, I think it was David Frost in The Telegraph who said something along the lines of everything the Prime Minister touches turns to lead. And so he's got this anti-Midas touch. And so I think it was David Frost who felt that Brexit could be saved because if Starmer swings into the Remain column, then Brexit will be untouchable. Yeah. So I think that was sort of where that came from. I think just taking a step back here, there is a zombie we need to slay. It's sometimes said that the UK has done well on trade since Brexit, and we've made new trade deals and done wonderful things. And oh, by the way, that you can't know the counterfactual of what would have happened if we hadn't left. And that's just simply not true. So we need to slay that zombie once and for all, because it turns out that we can see exactly how well the UK has been doing on trade or not, comparing to other G7 nations. And we measure this through something called the trade intensity. And trade intensity is the trade measured as a percentage of GDP. So it's an apples-to-apples comparison across all these major economies. And every major economy has faced COVID and energy crisis and supply chain issues. But since 2019, only the UK has diverged negatively from the rest of the pack. So if you compare the UK to other G7 countries, we are down on a trade intensity level and everybody else is up. And so people sometimes say, well, what about services? Isn't the UK doing well in services? And yes, we are doing well in services. The challenge is it doesn't compensate for the loss of goods trade. And it's not just goods trade to the EU, it is also goods trade to the rest of the world. And the drop in goods is so much that even the strength in services can't outpace it. So the bottom line is that we are unfortunately measurably and unequivocally poorer than we would have been without Brexit. And the worrying thing is we're really only 5 to 6 years into this 15-year adjustment. So in many ways, you could say it's time for us to get our skates on and see what we can do to try to untangle some of this folly.
Couldn't have come at a worse time, I guess, as well. There's obviously all the other challenges that we've seen compounding Brexit. Maybe it would have been hidden a little bit more had the world also not turned to poop.
I think you are going to see this one come back. Clearly, they put into the manifesto that both the customs union and the single market, that they were red lines. That's what Labour did. I do think you're going to see a reversal on that before the next election. I don't think they'll have a choice. They're going to need to find something to distinguish themselves from other parties and try and recapture some of the hemorrhaging they have of voters to both the Greens and the Lib Dems. There's no clear strategy, and it's just trying to muddle through, and they won't win.
And actually, to be honest, given what happened in the budget, who really actually believes or trusts any of their red lines or any of their yays or nays, because they clearly seem to ignore them within 12 months. And we now know that, the majority of the country do regret Brexit, and a customs union may be a kind of middle ground that is needed in order to kickstart growth again.
But will Europe have us? Will Europe have us back in any guise?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's with the biggest trading partner, like it's obviously our biggest trading partner, and it's a huge trading partner for the EU. So if the economics make sense, yes, they will.
The cash is flowing.
They've done it with Turkey. I don't see why they wouldn't do it with us. And as Mad says, the majority of trade is goods, so you do need to fix that. And so this may well be one of the solutions. I mean, politically, it will be difficult because just for context, a trades union does include some harmonization of standards, even though we wanted to get away from, free movement of workers, free movement of people, and EU law. If you're going to do a customs union, there will be some harmonization of standards, which, we know what that means again, straight bananas. That's the problem. Which will be a relatively ugly Pandora's box to open.
I saw the article about the IKEA labels, and I'd never paid any attention to
that. Is a fascinating article in the FT that I would really recommend reading. Yes.
Yeah, and how they've put it on the FT website, and how they've got this kind of lovely scrolling roll through where it's very un-FT.
The labels are basically bigger than the toy elephant, is what we concluded now.
Yeah, so they've got a toy elephant, and then they were showing all of the different unharmonized rules, regulations, and requests from all the member countries as to how they want
the French that have a label about 4 times the size of anything else that is required for recycling standards or something.
I don't know if any of you read the Volkswagen story this week, and looking at VW and Porsche, how much worse they are than European competitors. And as a part of that, I was looking at how badly the Porsche Taycan, the electronic car that Porsche, the 4-door, that has absolutely tanked, and they've absolutely screwed the pooch with all of the sales, the electronics, the battery technology. Everything has been quite difficult for Porsche. So that obviously has added to their misery. So I think there's a lot to be fixed over at Volkswagen. Anything else on the European turnaround? Mads, you're my voice of reason and positivity on this one. What else do we need to talk about on Europe?
But it's a challenging story, and obviously it's wrapped up with Brexit, because there's so many things that aren't right in Europe today. And so, one answer could be to say, well, we don't like the things that are not right, so we're going to leave and slam the door, which is what we did. The other much harder thing to do is to stay, fight, and try and make things right, which we didn't do. We've now left that to others. I think the truth is our economy is still inextricably linked with the rest of Europe. I mean, there will not be a successful UK without a successful Europe. So they must get this right, and hopefully we can all work together to try and make it happen. Kind of one thing is there's been a structural shift in the last decade, which has surprised us. It probably shouldn't have, but it has. Kind of the question was asked to a number of Chinese economists, what will you import from the rest of the world? On a purchasing power parity, it's absolutely a peer of the United States. What are you going to use all this economic power to import? Because we need some trade balance. And the answer is not really anything. Some commodities and maybe some luxury goods, some handbags, but not really anything beyond that, because the Chinese model is to import, learn, replicate, improve, perfect, and then push back into the world. And so when you have an economy like Germany's that was a global manufacturing powerhouse, so the best of precision engineering and automotives and other things to all of the world, including China, which is a massive, massive importer of German goods, and where they've now come to a point where actually we can start to make a lot of these things ourselves, kind of, automotive being the canary in the coal mine, but just an example of what's happening across industry. You have a structural shift that probably will never shift back, or at least won't shift back in the short term. So that
China's strategy is autarky, right? They're looking to absolutely be completely self-reliant. That's the end point for them, isn't it?
That's an interesting. It's certainly mercantilism, right? It's certainly mercantilism. It is, try and export as much as we can. I don't think it's that they don't want to be reliant on German cars, I don't think they mind that as much. I don't think.
But I remember the Mercedes sales figures. They flatlined at the beginning of this year. They were super buoyant. They're absolutely flatlined. I mean, from thousands of units to nothing.
But whereas I think they have a view of trying to have sovereignty around semiconductors, which they see as very important. I'm not sure that the automotive piece was driven by the same desire for self-reliance. I think it was much more about, this is how we do business. We don't like, your margin is my opportunity and I can do it better than you and I'm just going to compete. When Volkswagen was privatized in the 1960s, kind of the deal with the unions was, look, we'll privatize the company, but in exchange, we're practically going to give politicians and workers veto on any reform of the company. So 10 out of 20 board seats are worker representations. This means it's extremely difficult to close plants, to reform things when you need to. And so that has just made it really, really hard to remain cost competitive. Now, the EU actually tried to kill the law that prevents Volkswagen from being reformed, and Germany fought it and kept it. And so now you can't really touch that law. And until the politicians and the unions decide that now it is time to open up for kind of liberalize the way the automotive sector is run, you're stuck.
Matt,
right?
They're losing 30,000 workers by the end of the decade. How did that get through?
Yeah, but it's probably not enough then.
I don't know how many they have. I think it's like 400,000 workers in Germany.
Yeah, it's a fraction, right?
Yeah,
they probably needed 4 times that, right? Because demand has fallen off a cliff, and you're too expensive.
Bad cars, though. My last brand new car was a Volkswagen. It's a bad car. I mean, I know it's probably nothing compared to when you compare something like from Volkswagen to a BYD or something. They're getting so much for your Chinese dollar, but they're not good cars. I think it's been a conflation of multiple facets here that have absolutely driven this into the floor.
There are so many issues, though. I think someone at the top of this conversation said, like, there's so many levers that need pulling or equivalent in Europe to fix the problems. I think these are all just symptoms of the same problem, which is it's a cultural one. Europe is so obsessed with downside scenario protection and legislating. It tries to control everything. It has a psychological obsession with centralized control, partly because much of Europe was built historically on the French model. And that just seeps into everything. So when you see, it doesn't matter if it's the AI report or whether it's whatever it is, when we compare what the US does and its approach to what Europe does, and the UK ends up in some sort of, weird mongrel middle, not committing to either cultural direction, it's not surprising that we're just not moving fast enough and not enough's changing.
Sorry, I mean, sometimes said that it has to get worse before it gets better. I think maybe the hope here is
to force change. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, that it'll get worse so quickly. There's kind of this ripple effect through the European supply chain. This is what people forget, right? Automotive, it's not just about a manufacturing plant in Germany. It's also about a supply chain that ripples throughout Europe. Whether it's ball bearings or semiconductors, or there's so many industries that are dependent on our export success, and where the German locomotive, when it's great, pulls everybody. Well, when it doesn't pull, we all stall.
Matt, have we had the seismic shock that we need to create change? Because all we're talking about is history, but looking forwards, is this enough of a punch in the face to make change?
I don't think so. Just look at the UK. Right, it is clear that the model we have right now is unaffordable. Across Europe,
change.
We're still not making the changes. Germany has not had any growth. They've had negative growth on a GDP per capita basis for 6 years. Okay, the UK is just eking out a little bit of growth. We've got a more flexible labor market, thank God, but the public finances are absolutely shot to pieces, and we can't free up enough resource to invest. And meanwhile, the tax burden is going up and up and up. So there's no political will to make the necessary reforms.
China was unencumbered by a lot of the baggage that we had. And then it obviously had the benefit of central planning. I'm not suggesting that we should all move to central planning, but we're kind of stuck in this messy middle with the legacy and baggage of old industry. And the world is now moving at such a quick pace that we don't have the political strength and confidence to push through what needs to be pushed through, because people are a little bit torn.
So dare I say, do we need our Trump? Do we need our agitator? Do we need our extreme version of shock and I can't
Which
see
is
how
when
that
which is
would
when
end
the
well,
EU
but-
model kind of breaks down, because the EU model tends to be lowest common denominator, which is that, you need the consensus model where you need all 27 member states to
and
buy
then you
into
end up
all the big
with
things.
labels on elephant toys that are 4 foot longer than the toy itself.
And
right?
everyone focusing all their time and effort on that, and when actually the whole industry's already changed by the, I think the other news that came out this week in the Wall Street Journal was around carbon emissions, saying actually, so that maybe talk about something that Europe has done well, is that Europe has reduced carbon emissions roughly 30% since 2005.
But wasn't the flip of that, Lomax, that's come at such a cost, and obviously energy
Come at a huge cost,
and-
basically
and
saying,
innovation
very high
progression.
energy costs, electricity costs, which in turn
Not
then
only
leads to
that,
industrial
we
decline.
reduce our carbon emissions by offshoring our manufacturing to the rest of the world.
Which are far dirtier when they produce stuff
Yeah.
than we would if we did it
That's
in our own
such a
country.
Pyrrhic victory. I mean, this is
No,
that's
it
like
is,
the
yeah.
dumbest thing to celebrate.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it's back. And it's back to virtue signaling, right? It's back to rather
total virtue signaling.
than thinking about actually the consequence, thinking about outcomes, measurement. You're back to like sort of isolating one data point that sounds really good in a soundbite, but actually doesn't reveal what's really going on.
So there was this Clayton Christensen. He had this idea of kind of the innovator's dilemma, right? It's sort of you become really, really good at something, and then are you going to want to keep innovating to maybe make drive your own obsolescence? I mean, it's kind of Google search and Google AI, and will the AI chatbots replace search and kill the golden goose, or the kind of the cash cow for Google? I think you could sort of have a winner's curse to some extent. Europe was an economic winner since the Second World War. There was for decades incredible growth. We built these beautiful welfare societies. And I think to some extent, it just lulled us into a false sense of, well, we are maybe not quite as rich as the Americans, but almost, and isn't things going pretty good? And then suddenly you look back and there's just been 15 years of absolute stagnation, especially in Western Europe, when compared to other parts of the world.
I mean, I would challenge whether we've had a great success growth-wise. We were buoyed by the Marshall Plan. We were buoyed by the world getting back on its feet, which inevitably drove demand. But when you look at what America's done and the achievements America's made economically, I'm not sure that it stacks up that we
GDP per capita in the UK was higher than the US in 2008.
Okay, but was that a blip? You just bamboozle me with statistics.
No. I mean, I'm just saying, up into a point, there was convergence, and actually, then there was a point where the UK overtook the US on a GDP per capita basis. But yes, since then, it's been going in reverse. As we know, a lot of great U.S. innovation has come out of defense spending. I mean, the whole semiconductor, the reason Silicon Valley is where it is because kind of Raytheon and other companies were, needing semiconductors for missiles, right? You had the internet coming out of kind of defense investments. You've had so much defense investment that led to great innovation that then became commercial businesses. So I don't think all the defense spending was necessarily negative for the U.S. You can maybe almost argue the opposite, that the fact we didn't invest more has led to missed opportunities on our part.
I believe we will turn around. I believe Europe will turn around just through necessity and driven through all the other aspects that we've spoken about before. But how do we pair it back to our ecosystem?
The way you grow your ecosystem, and the reason why the tech ecosystem, as we know, is so important is because it's the future of everything. And the way you grow that is to retain the companies as being nation state companies. So that the revenues, so that the headquarters, so that the IP, so that everything resides within the nation state. And until we fix that problem, all the best technologies and companies will most likely end up in the US. Everything we talk about on this podcast for the last 100 episodes, which is late stage, you have to fix the capital markets. And secondarily, you have to fix the cultural blocker on spending a lot of money on things that possibly don't make obvious sense on a spreadsheet today.
Do you think that the lack of trust that people now have in the States is going to make any difference in our worlds for people doing anything differently?
Only if the products don't deliver the promise. So if you have a product which is 10x better or saves you 2 to 10x the revenue, AI in the enterprise or whatever it is, then people are going to want to buy those products and use those services no matter what. The space economy and the amount of wealth that can be mined from one asteroid, or the opportunities outside of outside of the grips of Earth's gravity,
You're always bullish on space, aren't you?
You start to paint a pretty grim picture at the moment on our ability to get there and manage it and control it.
Yeah, look, I think we've had a very macro discussion just now. I think how you tie it back to what we do. So what we do, I think, fixes a lot of the stuff we've talked about over the long term. How do you get to that point is, well, you increase spending in R&D as a percentage of GDP. You encourage your best talent. No, not in Europe at the moment. You encourage your best talent to go into technology. You encourage your immigration systems to attract the best talent in the world.
I saw repeats this week about more entrepreneurs and founders coming through.
You cut red tape. The government backstops important technologies by becoming the buyer of first resort, which is starting to happen more and more.
That feels like it's happening.
Yeah, and you cut red tape.
There's mutterings of it. I haven't seen it happening.
And sorry, the final thing is, as Andrew said, you fix capital markets. The problem, fixing capital markets is actually, is easier said than done, because it's not like the government the government does not have that much agency over fixing capital markets, almost by definition.
We
talked about before how there are there are three large pools of capital that the government can influence. There's its own balance sheet, sovereign wealth, but we know that actually the balance sheets of the European governments are not particularly strong at the moment, if you think about it in that sense. You have the pension fund capital, and then you have the insurance companies. Now, we know that in Europe, the insurance companies and the pension funds are historically hugely underallocated to privates, and within that, venture sits as a small component of that. And we know that in the US, they kind of follow the infamous or famous, Yale endowment model, where you're allocating 35% into privates. UK pension funds are mads allocated 2 to 3% max into privates, and within that, venture is only a very small component. So what you could do as a government is encourage through incentivization. You could either you force the pension trustees to put money in, or you encourage them to do so by probably giving even more tax breaks to these people. That's one way to potentially fix, but I think capital markets only gets fixed by performance. I think you need to create attractive asset classes. And the problem that Europe faces today is that, capital by definition is borderless and can go anywhere. And it's a competitive world when you can invest in China, when you can invest in Southeast Asia, when obviously you can invest in the US and NASDAQ and S&P 500. And Europe has suffered. So I think that is a harder fix. And until we fix that, we do have problems, because if you want to create sovereign champions in critical industries, you need companies to go and raise easily from euro 50 million to euro 500 million. Those kind of big pools of money where Europe has struggled to do the financing of. So I don't know. You guys have a thought?
I'm going to jump in two quick things. One, your pension data, 0.02% across Europe goes into VC. 100 times that go in the US. It's 2% in the US.
Probably more in the US. I would have thought.
Absurd difference. Yeah, it depends which numbers you look at, but it's 2 point something. Second point, the only way this is going to change at any speed is to vote in somebody who really believes what we believe about tech and gets it. So that means we better go and befriend Nigel Farage, and we better go and befriend whoever's going to be the next European Commissioner, and make sure they are, drunk monkeys on the tech bandwagon, and will readily action a list of a smorgasbord of requirements to make sure that we're not left behind.
Danny Kruger is the man you want to befriend, by the way. He's going to be running the country.
Let's get each of them on the podcast.
Danny Kruger.
Anyone listening to this podcast, if you know Nigel Farage, or who is it, Danny Kruger, give us an intro.
Currently
we'll get them on this
100 to 1.
podcast, and we will interview them.
We can get Danny Kruger, I'm sure. Danny Kruger, currently 100 to 1 to be next Prime Minister, is the Conservative. He's actually the son of Prude Leith, if you watch TV in the UK.
Right.
But
okay.
he is the Tory MP that recently defected to Reform, and he used to write Cameron speeches. Like he was a sort of spad in those days.
Is
Smart
he
guy.
part of the push that's talking about the coalition? Is it because of him there's
maybe,
coalition
but
chat
actually, I think Kruger he's the brains and the credibility in that party. And now that Farage this week has been outed as a major racist yet again, I don't know if that guy is actually credible. But now we're going off piece. But the point is,
we are so political this week. We are We are so in trouble.
We've been in
Mads,
the
bring us
forest
back to earth.
since we got off the chairlift. I mean, we've been.
Do you know what last week
everywhere.
was as well? Last week was fairly political. But we were pretty good about staying out of the weeds. Back in. Mads, bring us back to earth. Come on.
Yeah, look, so here's...
Absolutely.
Here's another angle. So it's easy to be Debbie Downer, but we tend to forget that the European venture ecosystem has seen explosive growth over the last 15 years. You had, what, 7-8 billion invested across Europe when you go back 15 years. Today, that's close to 50. So, right. So you've seen a much, much bigger growth in Europe. You've seen a great trajectory. You've seen a ton of good companies now starting to come out of it. Because it turns out when the capital flows and you back great founders, they're going to build great companies. There's so much talent. We absolutely need more money. I think you can incentivize, but I also think there is a thing for the pension funds around how what is a good trustee? What is it we ask the trustees to do? Today, we ask them to minimize volatility and to minimize fees. Okay, the quadrant of the deck you end up in when you do that is government bonds. Whereas what they should be doing is they should be maximizing long-term returns. And if all trustees across Europe get measured on maximizing long-term returns, you're going to see a completely different asset allocation strategy.
Can that happen, Mads?
Of course it can.
But what is the mechanic that's required?
You change pensions law.
Yeah, you have to change the pension law.
You change the set of rules by which pension
Why hasn't
trustees
Reeves
are
done that? Because the last time I saw Reeves speak live, she effectively said words to the effect of, "I've done my bit. It's over to the pension firms to now do their bit." And
it's a really interesting question. So the conspiracy theory is that the Treasury, because we're running these ridiculous and continuous deficits, need some schmuck to buy the gilts. And who's around to buy the gilts? Well, the only people that are around to buy the gilts are the pension funds. So they don't want to change the rules because then who's going to buy the pension? The gilts?
Doesn't sound that conspiratorial, Mads.
It's interesting. So I put this notion to several people who are close to government, and they all scratch their head and say, "Nah, no way. They're not that smart." But anyway, it's out there. Get your tinfoil hats on. That's the. Otherwise, I can't see why this hasn't been done yet.
Maybe we're too busy buying American debt.
I spend my life with my tin hat on, by the way. But anyway, that's another story.
Let's move out of politics. Let's get into AI Corner. So there's a bunch of stuff this week, as there is every week in AI. We've got Code Red from OpenAI. We've got Anthropic to IPO. Listen, I didn't know they were getting into chips. They're on the chips bandwagon. I saw another Bank of England warning about an AI bubble risk and what that's going to do to the rest of the economy. And another EU antitrust case this week with Meta and WhatsApp. But Mads, where would you kick off?
We could kick off at the top. Code Red, right? The tables have turned, you could say. So 3 years ago, ChatGPT and OpenAI sent Google into Code Red. And there was panic. They released bot. They did a lot of really weird things. But those 3 years, boy, have they been cooking and have they been moving. And last month, Google released Gemini 3, which is a phenomenal model. And now it's Altman and OpenAI's turn to sound the same red alert about Google. It's said now that Google has got 650 million monthly users, still behind OpenAI and ChatGPT at 800 million. But Google obviously has got formidable distribution because we all touch one of their products at some point. And so they can funnel users to their LLM model.
Mads, one quick question on Google. How much of YouTube and how much of the video side have they absorbed into their models? Do you know?
It is the biggest repository of data on the internet. It's clear that it would be the thing to use to train. It has been discussed to what extent they are allowed to do that and allowing themselves to do that. I haven't seen them publicly admit to having taken all the data for training yet.
Okay. Because I'm always intrigued. I remember speaking to a friend of mine who was working at the Beeb talking about digitizing and using the plethora of BBC content. And it always struck me that Google's obviously unique advantage is they have access. I mean, obviously OpenAI, Microsoft, I'm sure there's all kinds of backroom things going on, but Google surely has the golden goose.
Yep. And they created a formidable model. The OpenAI Achilles heel today is monetization. They're only monetizing 5% of their user base. They're hemorrhaging cash. And what Sam Altman has said now is we're going to slow down all initiatives that are not about making the ChatGPT experience better. And that includes monetization via ads. So, sometimes offense is the best defense, but clearly they are removing their main offensive weapon, right, which is, eating into Google's ad revenue. They're not doing it right now. They're focusing on just making the product better. And we'll see whether that turns out to be the right strategy.
Lomax?
Well, no, perhaps ironic that Sam, ran YC previously, and YC, one of their main mantras being focus, 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 and the power of focus. And clearly, OpenAI deliberately deployed a different strategy for a long time, but now has come right back to focusing on the core. So let's see how it goes. I think it's a necessary red alert that he's put out.
But there's no loyalty. I don't know. I get the brand play, and obviously because they were first out of the gate with LLMs, everyone knows ChatGPT. But I also get the sense that there's no loyalty in this game, and I don't know how you.
Well, no, I mean, look at Mark Benioff, who's put out his LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, saying he's now, having been an avid ChatGPT user, has now moved over to Gemini. Yeah, but I know anecdotally, I'm sure you guys too, a bunch of people who have.
Well, we flick around. I mean, Mads is my lightning rod. I mean, he uses everything and then comes back to the team and says, you've got to use blah, blah. And then we all kind of have a little bit of a play. But I think most consumers, most of the people in the working world now learn to type on glass, right? We are now in a generation of very technical savvy workers, which we didn't have maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I think there is much more openness to tech and much more awareness of chopping and changing and using the toolkits that you need. So I don't know that Sam Altman's focus is going to make meaningful inroads with regards to whatever the next phase of OpenAI's life is. It feels like they need to maybe, I don't know, focus on product or
there's three important factors underpinning the medium-term success and then definitely long-term success. One is the product good enough or better? Ideally better, but it can just be good enough. What is your distribution advantage in terms of getting it to people, getting it in front of people? OpenAI has an amazing brand, but Google is fast catching up and very quickly turning its Gemini's crap. Well, turning its, specifically with Gemini, turning its Gemini's a bit crap to Gemini's really good. That brand has switched pretty quickly. So to your point, there is little loyalty at the moment between users because we're quite early in the curve. But the third one is cost base and margin, at scale. And we're so early in this journey, and there's no question that Google can scale as cheaply, if not more cheaply than anybody. And the way that they have a cost advantage with the TPUs over FLOP and GPUs, and they've got their own dedicated data centers that they've been running, decades. They've always had a culture of scaling cheaply ever since the early days of Google search boxes. They don't have to worry about the NVIDIA margins in the same way because they've got their own dedicated hardware. So I think there are some quite fundamental advantages.
They're all going to end up there, Andrew. I always wonder, because if Amazon's now in the chip game, Google's in the chip game.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying they do win. I'm just saying that I think of the people who have a realistic chance of winning and dominating, those are going to be important factors. And OpenAI has got a lot of money, so I'm not saying it can't catch up. I'm not saying it can't make its own chips. I'm not saying it can't do any of these things, but Google has been doing a lot of this stuff for a very long time.
Everybody's got their own semiconductor initiative today.
Yeah, Meta has too, haven't they?
Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
Good for some of our portfolio companies, by the way.
There we go. Sell the book, baby. Sell the book. Yeah, because this is how Apple built their own silicon off the back of falling out with, was it with the AMD? Who was it used to build their GPUs? And they had a massive
CPUs,
falling out.
Intel.
No, it wasn't CPUs. It was the you remember in the early days of the mid days, the 2010s of like they were talking about super fast graphics on Apple devices. It was I'm pretty sure it was AMD. I'll have to look that up. But there was a massive falling out, which then created the silicon push, the Apple silicon push, because everyone got very angry because Apple fell out with NVIDIA as well, didn't they? So that was another part of that story. I'll be more concise next time.
Everybody's doing their own silicon for GPUs except for Apple. I think it's the only company without a coherent AI strategy.
I am going to fight you on that one, insofar as I'm still going to double down on my episode 24 prediction that Apple will own personal AI when it gets its poop together. It's lost 2 more people this week, hasn't it? Quite heavy hitters, I think. Was it head of design and someone from the AI department? But I'm gonna put them in the slow-moving winning camp for personal co-piloting in the next year, in the next 12 months. That's my prediction.
Bait you should jump onto the Apple soapbox.
I'm like, please, you've got more money than God. Please, come on, get your proverbial together and knock it out of the park. I so want them to own it. Anyway, it's not looking particularly good. Anything else in AI corner, Mads?
Anthropic to IPO. So is Anthropic, are they going to steal a march on OpenAI? Obviously OpenAI were first out of the gate. Anthropic were people that left OpenAI to set up the competitor. And OpenAI still has more revenue, but Anthropic has been growing extremely fast this year. They now picked the friends over at Wilson Sonsini. They also were behind the IPO of LinkedIn and Lyft and Google. And there are rumors that they're preparing an IPO for already 2026. Obviously, the company is still massively loss-making, and they're planning to reach break-even only by 2028. Will the markets accept a massively loss-leading company right now IPOing?
Like, as in, you IPO because you think it's a better way, easier way to raise money. Well, I think in the private markets these days, these companies don't have a problem. And it's also a way for your employees to get liquidity. But, every single company now has been doing a great job at this in the last few years of doing secondaries for employees. So why would they do this? Isn't it just a massive... the public markets aren't great for these kind of like cash burning companies. No, it's going to be a pain for them, no?
Maybe you're right. I guess part of what they'll want to do is to test the market appetite. But get a load of this. Think about how much capital OpenAI has been raising, how much capital Anthropic has been raising, how much capital X with Elon Musk has been raising. Now, everybody has been pitching every single family office, every single multifamily office, every single aggregator over the world to raise money for these LLM companies for the last 2.5 years. And there might be a view that, look, if we need to raise another tens of billions of dollars, actually, we need to tap into some of these bigger pools of capital we can find in public markets.
But is this a signal? This is probably going to be an ignorant comment, but is this a signal that the circular capital has dried up?
Or is it, as some people are speculating, a signal that Dario is thinking that actually, we got to get out while the going is good and try and IPO this.
Make some hay. Quick, no one's watching.
Get out
LLM.
the bags.
Don't tell anyone. This is as good as the tech's ever going to get. Jesus. Okay. All right.
EU have also fined X as of today, like $140 million for some other infringement.
What
They
was it?
just keep doing it.
What was the infringement?
The usual miscellaneous, misleading ads, misleading verification practices.
Yes.
Forget about it.
Okay. We are going to quickly move into Deal of the Week. Mads, what was your Deal of the Week?
Black Forest Labs.
Yeah, those slow, quiet monkeys.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful company, a German software company. They've raised $300 million at a $3.25 billion.
I thought it was 450.
Was it 450? I had 300.
I trust you more than me. I thought it was 450 at 3.25.
TechCrunch said 300.
Okay.
So Black Forest Labs, they've raised another $300 million. It's a German company from Freiburg. And what they are building and what they're developing is Stable Diffusion. So kind of the image model that everybody is using. They build a beautiful business. They are rumored to already have around $100 million in annual recurring revenue. So clearly you can look at that and say, gosh, isn't that quite a high revenue multiple? It might be high, but when you consider the growth rate, it's actually not crazy at all. So another beautiful, kind of really, really important AI company coming out of Europe. To anybody saying that everything is happening in Silicon Valley, it's just another example that that's just not the case. Let's build more Black Forest Labs. I mean, that's really all we have to do.
They were so quiet. I hadn't heard of them. And I know where my 450 came from. It was 450 in the last 12 months, or it was 450 since last year. So 300 in the current funding round. So that was where my little faux pas was from.
My deal of the week comes from the cold north, which is Finland. Finnish satellite startup ICEYE has just literally today raised 200 million euros. Also, General Catalyst, valuation now 2.5 billion euros. They've been leaning more and more into defense, like most of their contracts now in defense. As a reminder, they are a small sat manufacturer. Their specialty is what they call synthetic aperture radar satellites. So rather than optical or photographic imaging, they use radar, which means they can image the Earth day or night through clouds, fog, smoke, darkness, etc. They have a constellation of 62 satellites, and it's basically defense that's pulling this company forward. So I mean, ICEYE's been going for quite a long time now. I think maybe 10, 12 years, but they've really kind of hit their timing right now. So good for them.
Nice. Nice. Mine was Expedition Growth Cap. So they are growth equity firm in the UK, and they've raised 323 million euros, which I thought was kind of cool. Get a bit more growth into the growth bucket. So not a deal of the week on the startup side, but another fund. Bring on the growth capital. Gentlemen, anything before we go?
I've got
Go,
one.
go.
So Neurocore, it's a small round. It's not a big multi-billion-dollar round. I think they've raised 2.5 million, but they build a unified cloud-native platform that lets robotics teams train, manage, and deploy robot learning systems faster by sort of replacing a fragmented stack and in-house tooling.
Very
and I
nice.
think this is interesting because I've just seen so many people attacking the robotic space over the last 6-12 months. So many startups either trying to build the AI for the physical world or ground up new robotics hardware for different applications or verticals. We've got some in our own portfolio as well. But I think it is a sign that the fact you've got a startup raising money to serve the robotic startups is interesting. And
they're an Imperial startup, aren't they?
It's,
Aren't they out of Imperial?
Yeah, maybe. They're based out of London.
Yeah, nice.
So I think it's just a sign of where the curve is for robotics, and I think we're going to see, that is going to be the next wave. If you think the sort of the enterprise AI wave was interesting, the robotics wave, when we start getting served, drinks,
that's physical
coffee,
AI.
SuperSeed
pizzas,
thesis, no? It's fed into
Physical
Mads
AI,
and
it's a
Dan's
15
thesis,
years.
no?
Yeah, it's a 15-year
The big-
business plan. It is the most exciting thing to happen.
I just
ever
saw
in
Matt's
technology.
eyes light up then when you were talking about. Oh, yeah.
100%.
There you go. I preached a
Loving
fun
it.
for you guys. What
you
better
go.
thing can I do?
There you go. Well, that is it, my lovely men. Until next week, I will catch you then.